a newbie. He retired in September. August. Tom is a member of our administrative commission, and he is also an adjunct professor down at SMU Perkins School of Theology. So when I thought teaching Presbyterian history, I thought my teacher. He has a passion and a unique view on Presbyterian history, and I would call you an expert. Yes, so we were in Torrance Street. I also just want to make sure everyone has signed in this evening. And we left many interest forms up in case anybody missed that this morning and you want to read up and sign to learn more about the various committees that are about to start. Why don't we open with prayer? Most gracious God, we thank you for this time together as we open our minds to learn about the history of our church. May your Spirit stir in us a curiosity to learn and to grow as we view our tradition in different ways, that we may ever be learning from those that came before us as we seek to move into the future, following in the footsteps of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks, Laura. A couple of things before we get underway. First is that, quite frankly, Laura was the best student I had. Wait a second, that's not over yet. She was the best student that I had in many years of teaching this class until it came to Presbyterian history. She was great on doctrine, great on polity, history, and she won me. Not good. So I do need to share with you guys that you've got a real first-rate individual in Laura that requires a little introduction. The other thing that I want to say is that dealing with Presbyterian history for 500 years worth, and it's been a little over 500 years since the Reformed Church began, is not an easy thing to do in an hour. So what I'm going to do are hit the spots that I think you all probably need to be aware of. And I'd be glad to stop and answer questions at any time. I'll make that real clear. Because there is really no good way to rush through this. So I'd rather you get questions answered than be scratching your head after you deal with 500 views. Does that work for you? So, anything's fair game. One of the things I want to start with is what got passed out to you. Two different things. On the opposite side, same piece of paper, and the first one I want you to look at is this one. It's a bunch of boxes, right? All right, I need to start with something that I'm going to trust many of you already know a great deal about, and that is the Reformation. Okay? Raise your hand if you know what the Reformation was. Okay, that's a pretty good number of people. I'll be real quick. It's not a trick question. It unfolded in the 16th century, but it was preceded by 2 centuries of church reform, various churches. But by the 16th century, specifically, I want to cite a single event that really put that in fire. It was Martin Luther in 1517, basically going to the cathedral door and nailing up a bunch of statements that he wanted to discuss with regard to the church. And from that time on, things got a little interesting. But it had been building for 2 centuries. Okay, what I want you to look at is this. I'll be as quick as I can about this. When you use the word religion, the chances are you're referring to something that has a big, relatively vast complex of understandings. For instance, Islam is a religion. Christianity is a religion. Judaism is a religion. Roman Catholicism is not a religion, right? Okay. The three branches of Christianity are the three that are next down. There are only three. There aren't more than that. There are three branches. The church in the East, which we call Orthodox. The church in the West, which was Roman Catholicism. And Protestantism in its various forms, all of which began at the time of Reformation. There are lots of different iterations you can get into, but they all fall into that branch. Everyone in? Okay. Next down is what I want you to pay special attention to, and that is the traditions. These are the traditions, the main traditions of the Protestant movement. And there are only 4 of them. 3 of them are bona fide traditions. Okay? The first of those is the Lutheran tradition, who took its name from who? Martin Luther. And so it just sort of repeats his name. And it follows in his footsteps, and its basic homeland was most of Germany. The next one down that I want you, the bona fide traditions, the Reformed tradition. How many of you know who the, in effect, forefather of that was? John Calvin. Very good. Well said. John Calvin is the one who basically began the movement that we call Reformed. That's what he chose to call it. And lots of different denominations and streams flow from that. The PCUSA is one of them. I know there are RCA people now part of this congregation. That's another one. There are a pretty good number of Reformed denominations. Okay, so that's 2 of the bona fide ones. The next one is what I call radical. That's not exactly the name it had during the Reformation. The name was Anabaptist. Are you all familiar with that word? Okay, what does it mean? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you did baptize babies, you baptized those adults.
Very well done. That's exactly right. And Anabaptist means to be baptized again. For instance, when we talk about Jesus risen, the risen Lord, the Greek word is anastasis, which means to get up, stand up again. So to baptize again, in the Reformation anyway, was part of that tradition. First one didn't count because you were not of an age where you knew what you were doing.
Why do you call it that?
Oh, thank you very much, Warren. The reason I say radical is that, at least in the Reformation, these were the people who were most radical. Very basic, Bible-centric, refusing lots of other areas of endeavor. They didn't care a hang about government. You could take every government and hang it. And a couple of these guys did. Okay? Those are the 3 bona fide traditions of the Reformation. 4th one is over there on the left, Episcopalian tradition. The reason I don't believe that's bona fide is that most of you know your history well enough to remember Henry VIII, who didn't like Catherine, his first wife, and who claimed he never really married her, but he had to find a way to have Anne Boleyn become his bride. And that kind of flew in the face of everything, and he decided, well, I'm the head of the church, not the Pope, and the Archbishop of Canterbury will be the head leader. So that's why I think it's a little bit questionable, a little bit bogus, but for real. Those are the 4 different streams. All of them come from Reformation time frame. The Reformation time frame I take to be between basically 1517 and 1570. Pretty good chunk of time. Okay? Good. Yes, ma'am. Oh, that's good. That's good. You'd think, particularly given Methodist worship, that they're basically like us. And they are. I mean, sometimes it's indistinguishable. But the Methodists are part of the Episcopal tradition. Well, no, they have conferences, but what they do have is bishops. And then Episcopal is the Greek word for bishop. Presbyterian is the Greek word for elder, governed by elders. So, those are two kind of different things, right? So even within the Methodist tradition, it looks just like us until a pastor has to leave. And the next pastor is there the next week. That may look kind of attractive to you. And there is attractiveness to that. However, I don't think anyone, most Presbyterians would not like the idea of not being able to have some say in choosing their next pastor, right? Yes, Bill?
Where was Pentecostals involved with this?
Radical.
Radical.
Yeah, the Pentecostals are, I could list a number of different denominations, but that's not the point. It's just to give you all a perspective as we begin to look at the Reformed tradition. Okay? So speak up if you're not getting something. Calvin was born at a time when Luther was already an adult. He was born in 1509. So he was almost a generation behind where Luther was. But if Luther, and I coined this phrase, if Luther was the heart of the Reformation, Calvin was the mind of the Reformation. If there were any bestseller to be identified in the mid-1500s, the big winner would have been the Institutes of the Christian Religion, which is still in print, by the way, in 2 volumes. But it's sold like hotcakes. And the Reformed people were not the only ones who bought it. Lutherans bought it. So did some of the radicals. They were in constant communication and conversation with one another. So the things that I want to emphasize about Calvin, and you probably already know most of this, theologically, his centerpiece was the sovereignty of God. More than anything else, if you had to say something for Calvin, he believed that God was sovereign. I think today we'd say God's in control. That's where he came from. And all of his theological points of view tend to flow from that. He emphasized 2 other things that I want to make sure get lifted up to you. One of the, go ahead.
I have to ask you a question, and I don't get into a lot of history of Catholicism, but at what point did the early Catholic Church lose sight of the fact that God was sovereign? When did they change in terms of the position of the Pope and this and all that?
Being able to pinpoint that is hard, but over time, particularly with the rise of the papal office, there was an old statement that the early medieval church came up with, and it went on into medieval times, and that was, outside the church there is no salvation. Well, the Reformers took exception to that. They basically said, no, it's not the church who delivers salvation. That's not what it's about. And Calvin said, and did say the same thing. Church has nothing to do with saving, doing the saving. God does the saving. So the church is just an instrumentality of sorts. I don't know whether that answers your question. Okay, great. So number one with Calvin, of the two that I was discussing was there has to be an educated clergy, educated ministers. He felt real strongly about that. He felt like they needed to know the original languages. He felt like they needed to know Scripture backwards and forwards. And that was one of the great things that he bequeathed to us down through the years. The second was that he believed in a representative form of government. He was not the originator of that, but he believed that in the church there needed to be a representative form of government, in which the clergy were not the only ones who made decisions. And when he was at Geneva, you guys do remember that's the city where he's most associated. He built that into the city's government. There was a company of pastors on the one hand, and then there was this group known as the consistory on the other. And that's a word that has kind of come down to this day among many of the Reformed denominations. Consistory was all lay people, company of pastors with all pastors. Calvin was not a pastor. He was a lay person. And he was the one who basically moderated the consistory. He also was one of the 4 great lawmakers in Geneva. But he never did it alone. He was not the dictator that he's often made up to be. Everyone staying with me now? Good. Well, the importance of educated clergy. He opened a seminary outside Geneva, and lots of people were educated there. The one who most importantly was educated there was a Scot named John Knox, who many of you will have heard of. Knox was educated at Calvin Seminary, and he got so fired up about it. He took it back to Scotland and in effect, built it into the fabric of the Scots nation. Just wove it in there in such a way that to this day, the Church of Scotland is the Presbyterian Church. And that hasn't changed from the days of John Knox. It's just kind of woven in there. The English Civil War proved to be a little bit of a problem. Do any of you know about the Civil War? English Civil War? Okay, good. Some of you all are really, really good. You paid attention in your college classes, maybe? Are you read widely? Maybe? Okay. The English Civil War was a complicated sort of arrangement. Presbyterians and Congregationalists, you know that word? In England in particular, arrayed themselves against the king. Roman Catholics and members of the Church of England tended to arrange themselves in favor of the king. You know, it was the king or Parliament, or both. And all of them were involved. But Parliament, as the Civil War was going on, commissioned a Westminster Assembly. That was named for where it was held. They commissioned a Westminster Assembly of a number of divines, that means people who were clergy, who could get together and put together something that would be acceptable to all sides when it came to religious functioning. Sounds good, doesn't it? But these guys met throughout the war. It was a very, very long time. Began in 1643 and didn't end until 1648. Many of the people who assisted the Westminster Assembly were Scottish intellectuals who they had brought in because they were so good at the languages and so knowledgeable about the Bible. And so they kind of put their imprint on it. So, have you heard of the Westminster Confession of Faith? That comes from that gathering of divines. You may have heard of the larger catechism, and some of you are old enough to remember the shorter catechism, which was part of my confirmation, having to learn that. Good, you too. And then I got a prize in seminary because anyone who memorized the shorter catechism in seminary got book money, which was all of $200, which was an absolute king's ransom. So I memorized it again. But those documents came out of Westminster, and they became a guiding force throughout the English-speaking world, particularly for the Reformed people. So, one of the things that happened later, after the Westminster Assembly had broken up, is that there were more backs and forths between Parliament and King until it was decided by Parliament that they would appoint, when Charles II died, they would appoint William and Mary of Orange, who were from the Netherlands, and thorough Calvinists, as the regents of England. That's pretty amazing. But they came over and they were really good about everything. They did not suddenly require people to become reformed. They said, okay, we'll let you keep the Church of England, but one of the first things we need is a tolerant atmosphere. So in 1689, which was a year after they ascended the throne, they passed the Toleration Act. The Toleration Act basically said, you can believe religiously whatever you want, and you can attend the church of your choice and not be subject to any kind of legal action. That doesn't seem like much now, but it was a big deal then. And it was during that time that the first really big-time Presbyterian emigres began leaving England and Scotland and Ireland and coming to the New World. First congregation was established sometime in the 1640s on Long Island, of all places. But we know very little about this time frame, even though they were supposed to have kept good session records. Andrea?
Yes.
What we do know about is a guy named Francis McKemmy who came from Northern Ireland, where his Scottish ancestors had settled. And he came over after having been ordained in Ireland. And he decided he'd start some parishes, which he did. Some really nice ones, in fact. He settled in the Middle Colonies, which is where the bulk of the Presbyterians and Reformed people initially ended up. And there's a great story about him. He organized the very first presbytery on these shores. In 1706, the Presbytery of Philadelphia was organized with 4 churches. 4 churches. It's now got a whole lot.
What year did you say it was?
Oh, that was 1706. 1706. And it was interesting. McKemmy was, he was a firebrand, really, from the word go. He was not only Irish, he was also Presbyterian. That made him a difficult person for the authorities to manage. He and a colleague traveled to New York in order to try to inspire and plant some more congregations. Somehow his reputation preceded him in New York. And the governor of New York, who was Lord Cornsbury, told him, you will not be preaching here in New York. You're prohibited of preaching here in this place. And Cornbury went on to say that the Toleration Act that had been passed not so long ago in England didn't apply to the colonies. Well, all of the church's doors were shut to McKemmy, so he went to a home, the home of one of the people he was sojourning with, and opened all the windows and opened all the doors. And right there, the home was on Main Street, he started preaching. Well, Hornsberry heard about it and he came and arrested him, put him in jail. But McKinney also had some sense for the law, and so he said he wanted a writ of habeas corpus. You know, on what grounds are you putting me in jail? Where is the law that has said you can jail? And he was released because, of course, there was no law. And the Toleration Act, the Act of Toleration, did indeed apply to the colonies as well as England. Enough of that. The number of Presbyterians ended up proliferating, and by the time McKinney died, there were 4 Presbyterians. And they developed a synod, which was the next highest body, right? I mean, you've had this leadership thing going, and you've probably heard either Jim or Laura or, maybe both of them go on about that. So there was a synod of Philadelphia and 4 Presbyterians underneath it. Now I'm just going to start throwing dates and circumstances your way, because I can't really afford to go through everything. But this act was really, really important in the history of the Presbyterians. Laura, do you know what? I'm sorry, it's a history question. It's known as the Adopting Act of. It came about because Presbyterians were disagreeing. I can't imagine that, can you? It's one of those things. It was a theological response to disputes that were going on within the synod. This took place in 1729. And there were a number of clergy, McKinney included, who were Irish. And the standards of the Irish ordination absolutely required that all clergy subscribe to the Westminster Standards. No counting outs, no babies, nothing. And although there's a man named John Dickinson who gave his name to a college in Pennsylvania, John Dickinson said, I get the Westminster thing, and I get all of it, and I subscribe to it, but he felt really uneasy because his statement was, there is no other standard than Christ as Christ is revealed in Scripture. That can be the only guide for faith and practice. So you've got kind of 2 pretty polarized forces. And the Adopting Act basically meant that they adopted something that stood in between. They said, yes, we're not going to do away with the Westminster Standards, but we will require for any pastor who's about to be ordained, we'll require them to give verbal assent to the fact that Westminster, and I quote, had all the essential and necessary articles, good forms, and sound words of Christian doctrine. Whoever put that together was absolutely brilliant. And if you can tell me what it means, that's the whole point. So everybody was satisfied. The Irish got a chance to grill the new potential pastors and ask them that question about Westminster, and they'd say, yeah. So I point that out because I'll come back to it in a moment or two. Because there are other times within our history that we've had to deal with the issue of dissent, people who were firmly entrenched in the sanctuary. It would probably be helpful to simply say to you, go
historical question. Growing up in New England as I did, history wasn't one of the times the Irish always had a more difficult time. They were kind of put into it. Okay. Is that in part due to what you're talking about on the religious side?
That's a good question. It had to do with religion. The Irish I'm talking about were Ulstermen, people from Northern Ireland, who really in background were Scottish. So the term Scotch-Irish almost always was followed by the term Presbyterian. But the bulk of Ireland was Roman Catholic. It is to this day. And quite frankly, that was one of the major issues with the immense Irish immigration in the mid-1800s. Yeah, was there discrimination? Yes. But in large part, that's how a lot of immigrants have experienced coming here. Not just the Irish, but they certainly should be very sympathetic with immigrants who were given a really rough time. Anyway, quickly, how many of you have heard of the Great Awakening? Okay, how would you define it? Anyone who has heard of it, what's your understanding of what took place there? Yeah, go ahead.
It's a move of the Holy Spirit in the church to renew it and reawaken it.
That's right. This is normally associated with the early part of the 1700s. And the people, you're right, it was a reawakening of sorts, but for the other side, it was, oh my gosh, it's so disorderly that, we can't go about our normal tasks because these people are doing everything but speak in tongues. And actually, some of them were doing that too. But the people who most sparked this were George Whitefield. Is that a familiar name to any of you? He was an itinerant preacher up and down the East Coast, and apparently was just an outstanding orator. John Wesley was on the very tail end of it, and knew something about what that was like. And Whitefield and the brothers Wesley were good buddies. So the heart being strangely warm, which is good Methodist terminology, is what this was all about, the Great Awakening. There were a number of Presbyterians involved in it, not the least of which was Jonathan Edwards, who was, if you have to get technical, he was a Presbygationalist, which basically means it's a crossover. Congregationalists and Presbyterians were generally indistinguishable until it came to higher governing bodies. And then that's when they kind of fell apart. But both Calvinists, both pretty well-focused people. The Great Awakening had caused there to be two different sides, and I want you to flip that piece of paper over. If you look up at the top, that big bold line is the largest portion of the Presbyterian Church on these shores. And you'll see up at the top there's a rectangle. Old side, new side. In 1741, the old side decided we haven't had enough of these crazies. We do not need evidence of the Holy Spirit for this church to be able to function in the light of Jesus Christ. The new side said, wait a minute, the Spirit's always giving light, new light. Why don't you pay attention to what we're about? So that's the first big break in the Presbyterian Church, is on that issue of surrounding the Great Awakening. It won't be the last, believe me. But they had the good sense to come back together in 1758. That's what that circle means. If you look at a rectangle with a date in it, that means there was some sort of falling out, some sort of division. If you look at a circle with a date in it, it means there's some sort of joining together or reunion. That's how you interpret this thing, by and large. And I'm going to use this basically to kind of show the difficult times that the church had. The educated clergy of John Calvin really got Presbyterians into trouble in the westward expansion. Can you figure why?
At that time, they
Exactly. Exactly. So, the Baptists and the Methodists on the frontier, and certainly in Texas, multiplied like mad. Not so much the Presbyterians, because the congregations were told, well, you've got to wait until the pastors have his or her 3 years of seminary, and then we'll ordain, and then we'll give it to you. And then that just didn't work real well. When you were on the frontier, there were whole congregations of Presbyterians that became Methodists or became Baptists. And some decided they'd had enough of that, and in 1810, which you'll see right here, a whole stream broke off, the Cumberland Presbyterian churches. You all know what those are? We're still in communion with them. We're still well connected. But the Cumberland Presbyterians began because they wanted to go ahead and preach the gospel and did not require an education. Not true now. I mean, now they require everything we do. But back then, it was a pretty big deal, and so they made headway in the heartland. Kentucky and Tennessee, in Texas, because the Cumberland Presbyterian was the first preacher into Texas. Places like that, up and down that midsection of the nation, Cumberland people had pretty strong hold. Also, at around this time, 1810 to be accurate, the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists created a plan of union. They could fill one another's pulpits. They would share foreign missions together. They would share every kind of upper apparatus, boards of education. They would share everything, and they would not compete. So a lot of Congregationalists are up in the Northeast, and that's one of the reasons you find very few Presbyterian churches there. Because the plan of union said, no, you don't compete. You can fill their pulpits. They can fill yours. They can even call a Congregationalist to a Presbyterian congregation. No big deal. This is important because they were able to reach that connection, that being together. And they also were able thereby to send people, especially to foreign missions, without thinking too much about, well, do we want them encroaching on our territory or not? Believe me, that goes on to this day. There is a sense of non-cooperation among some of the Protestant groups in this country to send people overseas. If you'll look a little further on, 1837. Okay, this is gonna last a real brief time, and I'm gonna have to get up and stretch. You'll see old school and new school. Guess what? That's just real similar to old side and new side. There are those who say that this split took place during the Second Great Awakening. It was led by a man named Charles Finney in upstate New York. And he had such a profound effect on the new school that there were plenty of people who became old schoolers. This, again, was a split in the church. who just said, no, it's too disorderly, and he's too liberal, which he was. But that's part of the movement of the Spirit. You don't know where it's going to go. So some of the people who had been on the new side earlier found themselves in the old school later. Well, the old school and the new school happened both north and south. But, well, anyway, I'll be arriving at the next big issue. What kept them separated was not just governance and way of worship, whether or not it's ecstatic or whether or not it's ordered. It was also slavery. The new school was ardently against it. In fact, there were lots and lots of abolitionists who were part of the new school. The old school felt, you have to go slow on these things. We can't really move quickly. It has to be orderly above all. But you get the idea. Interestingly enough, there were old school, new school people in the north. And there were old school, new school people in the south. There just weren't a whole lot of new school people in the south. Okay, now's the time to either put your hands up, walk around for a second or two, and then I'll call you back. I'm just trying to keep you all awake. Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Okay, so did you say
No?
We have quite a few people here, didn't we? Did you run out of papers? Yeah. How many? Did you count?
62.
I know some of it, you know, but
That's another Presbyterian thing. If there's food, if there's drink, if there are people to talk to, hey, here we go. That's a good thing. One of the things I wanted to point out to you, if we can back up just a touch, was how many of you realized that a Presbyterian minister signed the Declaration of Independence? Well, who was he? Witherspoon, John Witherspoon, who was also the president and a professor at the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton. But he was a stalwart in a whole lot of ways. Did you know that there were 11 Presbyterians who were involved in the writing of the Constitution, at the Constitutional Convention? And there were 11, not the same, 11 Presbyterians who were part of the Continental Congress. So it was not by accident that the Prime Minister of Great Britain called the American Revolution the Presbyterian Rebellion. Well, he had a lot of baggage, see, had a lot of baggage. Go ahead, you're looking stunned. Yeah, Presbyterian Rebellion.
It was a good way to tag it to the Irish, too.
What's that?
It was a good way to tag it to the Irish, too.
Well, yeah, particularly the Scotch Irish. Oh, yeah. Because, they're rebels. Well, anyway, I want to try to move on a little bit because time grows short. If you'll look carefully at the old school and new school, the new school in the South had a fracture in 1858. It wasn't populated very much to begin with, as I said. The new school was not a big deal in the South for obvious reasons. But that small group got even smaller. What broke away was the United Synod. And again, the issue was one of slavery. The Northern Stream, continued on its way and really remained pretty strong, the new school. There were old school Presbyterians in the South and old school Presbyterians in the North. It was not a divide along the North-South lines. And so they did their dead level best to kind of find a way to stay together. The old school people. That became almost impossible. If you look up at the top part, old school, you'll see the date 1861.
Fort Sumter.
Well, shortly after Fort Sumter. But yeah, that put that in the fire. Shortly after Fort Sumter, the General Assembly met in New York City. And you can only imagine what that was like. And the Assembly passed something called the Gardner Spring Resolution. It was named for the person who put it forward. And basically all he said was, we need a season of prayer and fasting in the face of a national crisis, and we need prayer and fasting in support of the federal government. Now, I find it harmless, and you probably find it harmless, but I want you to imagine what that means. What that would have meant to the old school Presbyterians from the South who were attending the General Assembly. So you see that whole line, it goes down in 1861. And it becomes joined with the United Synod, who had broken off from the New School before, and ended up combining and becoming the Presbyterian Church in the Confederate States of America. Interestingly enough, the Old School and New School in the North combined in 1869. It was years after the war. And they finally came back together again as one Presbyterian church. And that's the line that you see saying Presbyterian USA. There are going to be some good things in here. The good things are, number one, in 1906, which has a circle, which means what? Union. 2/3 of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church became part of the mainstream Presbyterian Church. 2/3 of it. So it's kind of a remnant that's left now, after 1906, of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And it should designate that. It's kind of hard to do. You can see that the arrow going up to 1906. That's what it was doing. I need to tell you, it's kind of embarrassing that the Gilded Age in this country, when was that, you history people? Late 1800s, early 1900s. And why was it called the Gilded Age? There, you said it. Fabulously wealthy people, robber barons. I mean, those of you who know history know it fairly well. Kind of disturbing, at least from my point of view, was that a whole bunch of the robber barons were Presbyterians. Yeah, Anthony Carnegie among them. But Thomas Mellon, whose name was given to a substantial banking empire, Silas McCormick in Chicago, who created the McCormick Reaper and reaped profits like you wouldn't believe. Henry Flagler, does that name mean anything to you guys in Florida? Well, yeah. Those guys, John Wanamaker, for those of you who have Philadelphia roots, all of these guys were fabulously wealthy, and all of them were Presbyterian. There were, however, some who were on kind of the other side of the social movement at the time. Eugene Debs, who was raised in the church, who you may remember, he was a labor leader, was a promulgator of the Great Railroad Strike of the 1890s. Elizabeth Cady Stanton grew up as a Presbyterian, but then decided they weren't liberal enough, so became Unitarian. But it was the good Presbyterian upbringing that I like to think caused her to be who she was. In 1906, along with the arrival of the Cumberland Presbyterians, there was also something new that happened. For the first time since 1788, Presbyterians sat down and created a Book of Common Worship. First time since 1788, and all they had was the directory of worship that was put together by the first synod. Finally, they got around to a Book of Common Worship. And that made its first appearance then. And it was a good time for it to appear. It standardized a lot of practice for Presbyterians. You know what I mean by that? I mean, the order of worship became pretty much standardized. There were prayers in there, which really freaked out a lot of Presbyterians, because if you were from the Free Church tradition in Scotland, you didn't write your prayers out, you just prayed. Right? No. I mean, at this point, remember, the only real standard was what? Westminster. There was no other standard other than Scripture, of course. But Westminster was the only one that it kind of ruled, and you still had to give oral consent to everything that it contained. That changed. Anyway, the Gilded Age was in many ways a kind of discouraging time. But in 1910, this was kind of an interesting statement by the General Assembly of the Church. They adopted a statement that urged Christians of wealth to perceive it as a gift of God by which to assist others. That's a pretty big deal for some of these guys. They also went on to appeal to work as hard as you could for an equitable distribution of riches. That would go over terribly well today. For fair wages, for fair working hours, for safe working conditions, and also, this is the General Assembly of 1910, also some form of social security for old age. Very progressive. Go ahead.
Well, from those extremely wealthy individuals, there came about a stack of foundations. Is that the genesis of the foundation, the Carnegie Foundation?
Oh, yeah.
They listened to that, they said, okay, when I'm gone, this is where it's going to go.
Yes. Maybe, I'd like to think they listened to it. Carnegie, though, all along, I have to say, he wanted to die with no money. He wanted to give it all away. And he didn't succeed, but he came pretty close. Libraries throughout this country were endowed by him. Anyway, I could get into that, but it's just to point out the General Assembly was really pretty much in that sense ahead of its time. However, General Assembly after General Assembly did their thing with regard to temperance. The Presbyterian denomination was a temperance denomination, at least with regard to what the General Assembly decided. So in 1919, something kind of groundbreaking happened in that the General Assembly delighted and sang praises that the 19th Amendment, the 18th Amendment was passed, that prohibition. They thought that was wonderful. I would have had a hard time. This is the same. The 19th Amendment was not something that that most Presbyterians found discouraging. It was the right of men to vote. That had been something that the church pussyfooted around for ages. But in large part, the movement itself within the church bore a lot of fruit. Then, this is where I'm at. I should see it, the hour's gone. Let me say right quickly, in the General Assemblies of the following years, 1910, 1916, and 1923, that 1910 assembly was really busy. But all three of these, fundamentalists brought in tracts, hoping that the General Assembly would receive and acknowledge and affirm what they identified as the 5 essential doctrines that should be binding on every person who becomes an ordained leader in the church, whether minister, elder, or deacon. And these 5 different essential doctrines according to the fundamentals. And they were, this is a little different from TULIP, if you've ever worked with that. No, this is not the same thing as TULIP, although some of the doctrines are the same. Inerrancy was the first. The virgin birth was the second. Substitutionary atonement, the third. Physical resurrection, fourth. And imminent return of Christ, the fifth. And the General Assembly looked at them, and in 1923, that's the third of the assemblies that had them brought to them, had them submitted and approved them. Now, Presbyterian polity means that if you approve something that is doctrine, or substantively changes what we know as the Book of Order, that's pretty serious stuff. If it's doctrine stuff, it's got to go to all the presbyteries. 2/3 of them. Okay? This was doctrinal stuff, huh? Okay. They didn't do that. They just ruled on it. So in 1924, which was actually pretty quickly after the assembly met, a number of pastors met and signed a document called the Auburn Declaration in response to this attempt to railroad one particular kind of theology. In 1925, the General Assembly moderator appointed a committee to seek direction on this. Okay, here we've got 2 sides in different places. How do you bring about resolution? Well, in effect, what the committee decided was they rejected the notion that General Assembly could define doctrine for leaders rather than the presbyteries or local churches, who in effect were in charge of ordaining those people. Okay, are you getting that? It's nuanced with good reason. It's nuanced, saying in effect, some presbyteries may choose to make that a requirement, some may not.
It's a local decision.
Local decision. That's very much along the lines of the Adopting Act, which you may remember in 1729. What are the ways we can somehow manage dissent? There was a rethinking that began to take place early in the 20th century about missions. I'll say this, and then I'm probably going to have to cash it in. A document called the Layman's Foreign Mission Inquiry. That's a long word that you don't need to remember, but a Layman's Foreign Mission Inquiry stressed the need for witness to Christian love through mission institutions like schools, hospitals, and other benevolent action. And even encouraged a bit attempts to better understand other religions on the mission field. I want you to try to remember the times here. There was a lot of reaction to that from those who claim what they need to do is name the name of Jesus Christ, and they must preach, proclaim, bring in the souls. That's what the deal is all about. Others felt that, no, that was actually a really good idea. Sharing Christian love, that's a way that you do mission. That's a way that you also do evangelism. Some of you may know Pearl Buck, who was part of the PCUSA mission board at the time and was a mission worker in China, was among those who resigned in sympathy with those who wrote the document. She just said, I can't stay on here. If you're going to refuse to recognize the needs of the people to whom we go, those needs are crucial. And naming the name of Jesus Christ is secondary to the needs that the people have. Anyway, the 40s and 50s, many of you already know, were times of growth. What I do need to tell you, and part of it is, that the 1950s were anomalous in American Presbyterian history. They were anomalous. Never had there been as high a percentage of church-going in America, ever, in the 50s. Ever. Never had there been as much explosive growth in the denominations as in the 50s and early 60s. And the reason I say it's anomalous is people, I encounter people all the time now who say, oh gosh, look, all these social pronouncements the church has made, that's what driven people away. No. What was anomalous was the 50s. That was an unusual time, and to hark back, church-wise, to what went on in the 50s and 60s, really doesn't make sense in terms of our long history in this country. So I'll kind of leave you with that. Oh, I won't leave you that either. You've been really good. I'll be 5 minutes, and that's about it. How did we end up getting the Book of Confessions? Do you know? There are a whole bunch of them in there, right? Okay. There was no Book of Confessions until 1967. When the General Assembly authorized a group, actually that authorized it some years earlier than that, to write a new confession, which they did. And it went through a bunch of iterations, and because it was doctrinal, right? It ended up, yeah, go ahead.
Which act authorized this? Northrop Act.
Oh, so
USUV.
thank you very much. It was USA.
Yes.
Well, actually, UPC USA. That's really confusing. For years, it was PC USA. One denomination. And then, in the North anyway, it became UPC USA. And then when PCUS united with us, and it became PCUSA again. Confusing as all get. Good question, though. Thank you very much for that. The southern stream, PCUS, the northern stream was UPC USA. And the General Assembly, at its meeting, authorized a new confession. And the new confession was sent for iterations to every presbytery. People studied it to a fare thee well. They finally came up with a document that they thought was really excellent and reflected the times. But in addition, what they did was recommend that rather than Westminster serving as the only standard for ordination, that there be a book of confessions from various places and various times that the church could use as its way of best understanding doctrine. So that's when, beginning 68 and onward, that's when we finally ended up with a book of confessions instead of just the Westminster standard. came a little later when it came to the PCUS. As many of you know, if you grew up with the PCUS, reunion took place in 83. And the brief statement of faith got added to the Book of Confessions in 91. And what is the most recent one that we have in the Book of Confessions? Belhar. Well, Jim, good. But the young woman up here, she beat you to it. Anyway, there's plenty more, but that's a start, folks. Thanks for your attention. I really appreciate it, and I'm wondering if we could close with prayer. Or Laura?
No, I just had a quick announcement.
Oh,
For
okay.
everybody who's parked over in that lot, the Guatemala team would love if you would help them carry some boxes as we head that direction. So, thank you.
Great, good announcement.
Thank you, Tom.
Sign-ups.
And
Folks haven't signed up.
if you haven't signed in tonight out there, if you're interested in committees, there's still plenty of room, and we'd love to have all of you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Join me in prayer. Loving God, you've been our help in ages past and our hope for things to come in this congregation and elsewhere. We rest upon your grace, and it is sufficient for us. We rest upon a long history of people who've been called by your name, and we have been blessed by it. And we ask right now that your Spirit may rest in a very special way upon all of the people gathered here and on Grace Presbyterian Church itself. That it will forge ahead, that it will be reminded continuously of its good history, and that it will look toward the future rather than the past when it